this time, I'm actually going to ask Jaqueline to come into the room here with me, to the studio. And Jaqueline has been, like I say, yeah, come in, woohoo! Yay! Good to see you, Jaqueline.
It's good to be here, thank you.
Awesome. And Jaqueline, you've been a friend of mine for about 5 years.
Yes, we have been friends.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have a business called Speaking You. You do motivational speaking, and you have done motivational speaking, I know, for a long time when I first met you.
Yes.
And right now, you work with people. And would you want to share what capacity you work with people and what you do?
Sure. Thank you, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here, Scott.
Yeah.
And I love working with people. I've always said that I enjoy being thrusted into the sacred story of people, the sacred story that has sometimes terrain that is full of brokenness. And that's what I enjoy doing. I thrive in that, helping people enter into a place of self-awareness, of purpose, of being able to know that they don't have to be stuck in life. That there's a process for that, but there's hope. And so I work with different clients that have gone through all kinds of relational issues, relational brokenness, feeling stuck, feeling ashamed and guilty because they're unaware of what's going on with them, and people who, because of their upbringing perhaps, are unable to share it with anybody. The shame of just sharing that with somebody is too much, and so sometimes they keep those struggles secretive. And secrets have power, you know. And so we're very interesting human beings in that we don't want to live in fear, but we end up living in fear. And when we live in fear, it stops us. It sucks the life out of us. And I try to guide people finding their purpose again and finding their path to freedom, which to me is one of the most important things. So Speaking You, what I do is I do that, but I also do motivational speaking, like you said. I love going into different places and sharing with people those things that help us move forward in life. So I do life skills as well. So anything from time management to leading to conflict management, name it. You know, I enjoy doing that as well. And that Speaking You encompasses all of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One thing that I've always recognized about you, Jaqueline, is your spirit. You're so happy and you have such a big smile. You're so happy and you're alive, right? And how do you think that your attitude with life, like I know that you have a story and you've shared that story with me, but how has your attitude about life and overcoming things influenced you? And also, part B, how does that influence other people when you're coaching with them or leading them?
That is a very good question, Scott, because attitude is a very important part of the journey. I mean, our stories have many losses. Our stories have many endings. But with the endings and the losses come the beginnings and the opportunities and the gains. And I think that I've been always the kind of person that has believed in possibilities and opportunities. My father really was the one that continually talked to me about that. And so I believe that I'm a strong believer that any time that there's a loss, there truly is an opportunity for gain. There's a new beginning. And so I have tried very hard in the midst of my losses to be able to focus on the fact that this isn't the end of it. This is not the way it's going to be always. Everything changes, right? Not everything lasts forever. And so that is the focus that I've had. And despite everything that I've gone through, and I'll be sharing my story in a bit, despite all of that, I believe in life. I believe in myself. I believe in that inner strength that every human being has to move forward, to step out of the place where they're at that creates scarcity. And so because of that, I think I have that positive spirit and that attitude. I shouldn't say, I can't say that I'm always effective with it, you know? We're human beings, right?
Of course.
So, but I try to keep perspective of the fact that there is, I'm on a path, I'm in a direction, I'm on a journey, and that journey, the process of getting from point A to point B, has the terrain, it can shift and can change, and it's being aware of that, of all those changes and all those shifting that takes place. That will take me to where I'm supposed to be. Sometimes I don't even know where that is, but I end up there. How has that affected my influence with clients? You know, there are times when there have been clients who have said to me, how is it that you keep so positive? Where is it that you acquired your wisdom? And I keep saying to them, it is something that I intentionally work on. Yeah. It's not something that all of a sudden happens and I wake up every morning and I'm like, way to go. No, it's not like that. It's a habit. It's a pattern that I have chosen to follow. Yeah. And so it's intentional. Yeah. It's very purposeful. Yeah. And sometimes I lose it and then I come back to it. And so that's what I continually instill in the clients, knowing that anybody and everybody is able to enter into that path. Awesome. That's so cool. That's so good. And I'm glad that you mentioned intentions as well. Yes. Intentions are such a huge difference maker. Before you go into something, you set intentions. And before I came into this first TV show for Abundance Coaching TV, I set intentions. I wanted to connect with people. I said it at the beginning. You didn't know that, but I'll tell you now. I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to connect with you. I wanted to connect with you and to myself. I wanted to be authentic. I didn't want to just like show you a whole bunch of flash and shows and stuff. I wanted to be real, and that's part of where the story came out. And I was thinking about, okay, how am I going to introduce this Abundance Coaching TV? And I thought, you know what, let's talk about stories. Let's talk about your story. And I wanted to connect and have authenticity for you. And I wanted to make sure that they knew that they're amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how does that change? I'm sure we didn't discuss this earlier, but how does that change to hold those type of intentions? You need to be very aware of what the intention is. And sometimes in the midst of struggles, it's very difficult to hold on to that. It's very difficult to know this is where I'm heading, because in the midst of struggle and pain, you don't know where you're heading. Yeah. So the intention becomes very small. It doesn't have to be a huge goal ahead of you. You know, you don't have to think about 2-3 years in the future. You think about today. What is the intention behind today? Yeah. And you work with that. And so again, it's little steps, it's little choices. Every choice takes you to the next bigger choice. Excellent. Very cool. So I brought you on because I know you have a story. Mm-hmm. And you knew that our topic of the day is going to be telling stories. Yes. So would you share part of your story with us? Just Absolutely. As much as you want to share. Yeah. I understand that some of it, you won't want to necessarily share live, but just share. And also, when you share your story, can I ask you a favor? Could you actually weave it in such a way that someone on the other side could take something away? Mm-hmm. And I know that you do that anyway, but just to be intentional with that. Sure. Well, stories are big. And your story, Scott, is big, and my story is very big, and it's very hard to know where to start. So you kind of have to think about what is it that I hope that you take from the story and then mention or tell that part of it. And so tonight what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the part of my story that entails losses. And this took place, it started, my whole life I've had losses, but one of the most recent losses is one that I experienced 6 years ago when my marriage was falling to pieces. It was falling apart, and I lived for 2 years in a very unhappy and a very miserable marriage. Not for any other reason than the fact that I was miserable in it, and from the side of my husband at the time, there wasn't it didn't seem like there was a cooperative spirit to be able to resolve what was taking place. And so for 2 years I lived in what I call, what I'd like to describe as comfortably miserable. Because I was miserable, he was miserable, but we somehow decided that we would stay within that misery, because
Right.
it was a lot easier to fit into that
Right.
and less scary to continue within that than to make choices that would lead us to the next segment or part of our lives.
Right.
And so I lived like that for 2 years, and then finally 4 years ago, when life became intolerable, I decided at that point that I would remove myself from the marriage, and so I decided to separate at that time.
Mm-hmm.
What made things a little bit more difficult, however, was the fact that at the time I was also a pastor at a church in Saskatoon, and I think that one of the toughest part of my journey was not only the fact that I was experiencing a failure, what I described at that point as a failure in my marriage, but also what I was always used to and accustomed to, which was to be a part of a ministry in the church.
Right.
That I knew would have its consequences, because within the church context, the fact that you would have a crumbling marriage as a leader is not necessarily something that is accepted or tolerated, and harshly judged.
Yeah.
And so what was very interesting that was the fact that for the 2 years that I lived in misery, I was able as a pastor to partake in everything that a pastor is able to. So I was able to preach, and I was able to counsel, and I was able to baptize, and I was able to do many things within the church, so long as the church didn't know that
Right.
my life was miserable and that my marriage was falling to pieces. But upon the decision to leave the church, to leave the marriage,
Mm-hmm.
things changed.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the church had a very difficult time knowing how to handle me. But they were pretty good. They gave me an 8-week leave, and that was wonderful. But the 8 weeks leave was for me to ensure that my marriage was restored. Well, we cannot restore a marriage within 8 weeks. So came back to the church and so forth. To make a very long story short, within a year after I returned to the church, the pastor had given me the opportunity to work with 3 people who would come alongside me and would listen to the entire story with all the details. And so I walked with them, and they were going to give recommendation as to whether I would be ordained eventually within the church. And unfortunately, however, and I will never know for sure the reason, upon the moment when I actually told the pastor that I would be divorcing, and that would be a decision that was inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
Upon explaining that to him, verbally saying that to him, a week later, unfortunately, one of my greatest fears came to realization, and that was not only that I was losing my marriage, but that on top of that, the church would let me go,
Yeah.
because that was, I believe, unacceptable for them. So one of the things, the paradox of all that was always, and the irony was the fact that I remember specifically telling the pastor, so instead of coming alongside me and working with me through something that is so horribly difficult and traumatic, I would be punished instead, and said, you're gone. So one of my greatest fears, which was to lose the ministry, to lose what I believe to be one of my loves in life, was taken away, and it was done in a very demeaning and cruel manner. I saw it as an injustice, and when you're going through that pain, that agony of seeing yourself in a place of injustice, of unfairness, and the dynamics of everything that took place during that time was very, very hard.
Yeah, I imagine.
It's very difficult to have a positive perspective. It's very difficult to be intentional. It's very difficult to trust in yourself. It's very difficult to see anything positive come from that, because you, at that point when that took place, I remember that the 3 people who had walked alongside me and who knew the whole story saw that what had taken place was unjust as well.
Mm-hmm.
So to some degree I felt validated by that.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody can actually help you through the pain and the anger and the bitterness that you feel at that point.
Yeah.
So the losses were huge. When I made the decision that I would separate from my husband and inevitably divorce, I took my risks. I knew I had to end the hypocrisy in which I was living, in the sense that I continued in a church where I knew that I was not given the freedom to be everything that I could be.
Right, right.
So I had to make a decision to that degree as well, and come up front and say, this is what I'm going to be doing and this is my plan, knowing that most likely the end result of the outcome would not be beneficial to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one day, shortly thereafter, feeling so at a loss and feeling insignificant in life and purposeless, and wondering whether I had ever contributed anything to life, because when all of a sudden all your sense of security is taken away from you, and your sense of not only security and safety but of significance is taken away from you, that's pretty huge.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Sure.
So I remember sitting in front of what used to be my place in a little town away from here, and thinking to myself, at this very moment where I am, I have lost a brand new house. I have lost my reputation. I have lost my friends. I have lost ministry. I have lost marriage. I have lost so much. And interestingly enough, I clearly remember all of a sudden just coming to a recognition that I was in a space of complete uncertainty, of complete insecurity, of complete instability. Everything that was significant to me was not there. And I remember smiling to myself and thinking, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I am okay. And from that moment, I began to enter into a place of recognition of what these endings, as horrific as I saw them to be, what those endings would bring in my life. And I knew that the chapters were closed, and I knew that I couldn't be angry with anyone, because in our stories, we always contribute.
Yeah.
We're always contributors.
We are. Yeah.
And I had to come to the realization that I was a contributor to the end of my marriage. I was a contributor to the end of the ministry. I was a contributor to the end of the church. I was a contributor to all those things that were my story. And I couldn't blame anyone, even though the temptation to blame was so huge. And I wanted to blame. I wanted to blame. But I realized I could no longer do that if I was going to make the choice of seeing the promise of a new horizon, if I was going to be looking at the fact that there was a new beginning ahead for me, and that I needed to find my way in the midst of the struggle, in the midst of the pain, in the midst of uncertainty and instability and insecurity. I needed to find myself.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how I was going to do that. The only thing that I did do was that every choice and every decision I needed to make along the way, and every occasion, every day of life, I would reflect upon.
Right.
And as I reflected, I began to be incredibly aware of everything that was taking place. For 15 years, I've been somebody who people have come to for counsel, for suggestions, for advice, for guidance. And I felt I had no one to turn to. I had to turn inwardly. I had to turn to myself. And everything that I had spoken into people's lives, I had to relearn for myself.
Sure, yeah.
And a shift had to take place, because I was in a place of learning, and I was in a place where what was once theoretical was becoming life for me.
Yeah.
and the path was, it has been indescribable. It has been a path where self-awareness has catapulted me to a different sense of serenity and peace. And I've had to reevaluate values, reevaluate beliefs, reevaluate faith, reevaluate friendship, reevaluate relationships, reevaluate everything in life. Everything that meant something at one point, I had to come to terms of, what does it mean now?
Yeah.
And what importance does it have in my life? Does it have any? That which at one point I saw as something that I needed to cling to and hold on to and have in order for survival,
Yeah.
I realized soon enough that I no longer needed it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything started shifting, priorities started shifting, values shifting, everything did. And I've been thankful for all the endings and the losses, because it has brought me to a place of new beginnings. And of course, the new beginnings will come with its endings as well.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
that's in a
that's
nutshell.
Awesome.
A little bit of my story.
First of all, just way to go to be so brave to come out and just like share so real, like so with so much realism, and to be so raw and share your story this way.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there are people out there, Kelly, you probably are seeing people out there that have commented on this story as we've just gone along. And yeah, you know, like I shared a story, and you're right. Everybody has a different story, don't we? You know? And one of the things that has to be shared too is that not everybody's story is something where there's necessarily something majorly positive that can happen, in the way that you know, if you're in a wheelchair, maybe you can't actually have that positive, like I'm gonna run again. And I have some clients that I have a deep passion for that are in wheelchairs. And one of those clients, his name is Victor. And Victor has an incredible story. And I told Victor he's going to be watching, and his mom and dad are watching right now, actually. And I can just see Maggie, you're just jumping through the screen right now. You're glowing. That I'm going to tell this story. And I want to tell you this story, and I want everybody that's watching to hear the story as I share it, because I think that it's important, it's powerful. Victor is around 50 years old, and he has MS, and he has it to the degree that he's actually restricted to a wheelchair. Some people may have written him off in some ways because the way that the disease has affected him. He sometimes repeats himself, and sometimes it's harder for him to retain information. Now, I think Victor's so smart. Like when he's on, he's got so much brilliance in him, and I see that. I also get to spend an hour a week with him, and he still beats me in chess almost every time whenever we play. Victor told me a while ago, and I don't know, Adam, if there's a possibility of you playing his little intro video or getting Victor's intro video queued up. That would be really cool if there's a possibility of us doing. We had some technical difficulties earlier, so maybe that's not possible, but we'll see, Adam, if you can do that. And if you even want to just like play it and then just have the little green bars around it, that would be cool. Victor had a passion to write stories. And I thought, wow, how fitting. I kind of weaved this topic around something that he had. And he wants to tell stories, but he doesn't have as much accessibility to tell stories and then have the world find out about it. Well, I have the fortune of having thousands of people who are invited to this call or to this video TV, and I have the privilege of just wanting to connect people and to communicate messages. And I want to share Victor's story with you. Victor had an inspiration when he first heard the starfish story. So, and if you haven't heard the starfish story, it basically goes like this. All of a sudden, one day at dawn, an old man was standing on the beach, and he saw a young man throwing starfish, or throwing something into the ocean. And the old man went up to the young man and went, "Young man, what are you doing?" He had all this joy and this glee in his eyes as he was throwing these starfish into the ocean. He's like, "There's so many starfish out there. how could you possibly save them all? And he said, well, if I don't save them, then they're going to die. And the old man persisted, saying, well, but it's like, look at the beach. There's thousands of miles of beach. Surely you can't save them all. That's why I can make a difference to this one, the young man said back to the old man. And he threw that starfish back into the ocean. And how cool is that story? Because in life, it's kind of like that parallel too with us where I think about my life. And sometimes I think, okay, well, I can't make a difference to all these people. There's a lot of starving people in Africa, but I can sponsor two. And I can make a difference in their lives. And I know that there's people, actually, Kane, if you're still on here, man, I'm so proud of you. My brother-in-law, Kane, he just did a bike ride, 200K bike ride.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it was for cancer, and his mom passed away this past year of cancer. And he can make a difference to somebody for cancer treatments. And there is a difference that you can make for one. Right? So Victor told a story. And this story, I think, is just incredible. I'm just going to share it here with you. And Victor's idea was that he wanted to come up with the second thoughts on the starfish story. And Adam, is it possible to watch the video at all? And I'm here with Victor. Say hi, Victor. Hello. All right. And we are in a coaching session right now in March the 7th. And right now we're talking about, and we have been talking about some of Victor's big dreams that he has. And we've talked about some books and some other things. Would you be able to tell me what your dream is? And just start at the beginning.
Well, my dream is to write a book that's got the chapter 2 on all these great little stories. So what I'll do is I'll give the quote, the full reference to where I got it from.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the starfish story. I found that one on the internet. It's just a little story.
Yeah, why don't you say what that story is?
Well, this is about a man who was visiting the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And he was watching this boy, a young man, looked like he was dancing to greet the sunrise.
Mm-hmm.
He thought that was kind of cool. And then he went a little closer and saw what he was actually doing. He wasn't just bending down and then jumping up. He was bending down and picking up a starfish and throwing it back out to sea.
Mm-hmm.
He was saving their individual lives. The old man saw thousands of starfish, and he thought it rather pointless. So he explained to the young man, what you're doing is making no difference at all. And the young man just bent down, picked one up, and threw it back out to sea. He says it made a difference to that one.
Mm-hmm.
So he was saving the life of his starfish. Someone. I like that story.
It's a great story, isn't it?
Yeah, and I had read it before and I liked it. And then one night I was sitting at a recovery meeting and for some reason 2 bubbles sort of went down my head.
Mm-hmm.
They were encompassed. It wasn't a visual thing, it felt like 2 drops of rain. And the first one was that story. And the second one was chapter 2, which I had never heard. And that got me thinking that I should write this down. Because there was no chapter 2 that I know of. And I wrote it. It came to me when the drop exploded like a dream. Just poof.
Cool. And that inspiration has remained with you. And part of the reason why I know that it's remained with you is because you talk about it. You and I talk about this, frequently, about the ideas that you have. And those ideas keep on coming up. And they grow a little bit sometimes when we talk about them too. So what did you take from Victor's story?
It's the legacy,
Mm-hmm.
right? What you leave behind. I mean, it can be multiplied. The
Mhm.
more people that are influenced by what you do, the more they will do the same, right? It's the effect that takes place that's permanent. It's a legacy.
That's awesome. It's so true. Victor, I'm proud of you, man. You did an awesome job. And you're right. He wanted to leave a legacy, and actually this is the legacy that Victor in the pen writing this actually came to. And Victor couldn't actually write this. He has very little mobility with his hands. So I actually wrote it. And all I did was I asked him a bunch of questions. Okay, what happened next? It's like, okay, they were throwing frisbees. Okay, sounds great. I wrote it down. We just put the words together. And he wrote this. And Victor, I'm sharing this right now because I caught your vision. Because you told me that you wanted your story just to be heard. And you didn't have an avenue really for that to be heard. Well, this is on public TV, on the internet right now, and your story was heard. So for anybody on the chat room, anybody who watches this replay, that was a story from Victor DeFair. And it's called Second Thoughts on the Starfish Story. And you're right, it's about making a difference to all that we can. Yeah, we only have so many days in our life. We only have so many days to tell our story. So it's so vital and so important to tell our story, isn't it?
And we tell our story in different ways. It can be written, it can be in poetry, it can be in song, it can be in small gestures. It's about just being willing.
Yeah.
Being willing. And we don't have to share all of our story.
Yeah.
We can share bits and pieces of it.
Yeah.
Our stories have impact.
Yeah.
Because they're ours. And the greatest part of it is that the more you hear other people's stories, the more you realize we're no different. We share the same pain, we share the same hurt, the same brokenness, and the same celebrations. It's just experienced differently. So we are all one that way.
Yes.
And the more we hear each other's stories, the more we learn. And when we hear something, all of a sudden it'll trigger something within us, and it'll help us to reflect upon that, or somehow it's prolonged in our memory, and we may not even realize why it's there. And then something happens, and we get it.
Awesome. That's so true.
Yeah.
So true. And there's one other thing that I want to share about stories, as you were saying that I think really is powerful too, is the openness that we have to hear other people's stories. Busy. Everything's busy, right? And to stop and say, okay, I'm taking some time out. Somebody started something, and they're probably only going to tell us this little slice. But I can tell you countless times when I've just stopped myself to hear somebody's story, hear what's going on with them. And I can tell a quick story about, I was recently on an airplane. I was flying back from Abbotsford, and I had the privilege of jumping from the airplane, getting on the airplane and sitting beside an elderly lady. And she actually recently lost her husband. And we had a captive audience. And I could have just done what a lot of people do and stared forward. But I didn't. I started to talk with her. And she shared the most incredible story that just sticks with me. And because of that, too, I had an opportunity to share with her. And she had a hard time because everything was with her husband. And one of the challenges that I gave to her is that she would actually go out and do some of the things that she's passionate about. We talked about her passions again. And she recognized that she really could do some of those things again. And that really made a big difference for her. So listening, you have so much power to receive a message and to also be able to like insert and just to hear and give a message as well. So which is really cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, this has been great.
Great opportunity.
Awesome.